Your AI coding agents are not to be trusted, but they can be harnessed. That's the theme for this week. Hello, you're watching the development vlog for Shokken, a restaurant waitlist management tool that is currently available on Google Play Store and soon to be made available on iOS App Store. This is Bill from Shokken, and this is week 73 of development. I use AI coding agents on a daily basis for this particular project, in addition to a lot of things that I do outside the project. I do not trust it. I have a methodology that I'll discuss in just a moment with regards to how to harness their power correctly. But before I talk about that, I want to mention briefly with regards to the general consensus, if you will, the general feeling that the industry has in North America with regards to AI agents and AI coding agents in particular. And there seems to be this permeating, pervasive, and very palpable distrust and displeasure in general with regards to the AI coding agents. And then I think that there are really two themes about this hate. Number one is what the AI coding agents would bring about in terms of change in the industry. And I think that a lot of that, I'm not going to address too much of that, but I think a lot of that is probably copium with regards to the shift of the industry. Like, this tool is coming and this tool is transformational. And either you try to figure out how to use it, harness it correctly, and become productive with it, or you stick your head in the sand and be like, this is horrible, we shouldn't worry about it. That's your choice, but that's not the major discussion of this particular video. The second hate, if you will, comes from perhaps a more practical standpoint, which is people have tried to use AI coding agents and then they've come up with disastrous results. We see things with regards to secrets being committed, API keys being committed to public repos, and horrible code, spaghetti code, and non-standard use of tools and components, and a lot of bodging. If you're British, you understand what that term means. Basically, makeshift things such that the tool or the app that you're building would work, but not in the most optimal way. And this, I think, is quite a bit more legitimate in terms of the criticism of the AI tools when it comes to assisting you with coding, because these are legitimate problems that you need to solve before your app can be considered really production quality. And this is the part I want to talk about today. The theme seems to be the case seems to be that most folks who start using AI coding agents treat them as if they're agents. And when you think of agents, you sort of conjure up this image of a trustworthy, reliable tool that gives you deterministic results and the results that you're looking for, right? And I think that that's the biggest downfall with regards to how we use AI assisted coding tools, because we shouldn't look at them as agents or tools. We should look at them as if they're employees, things that are not highly skilled employees, but are not deterministic and not perfect. And that's the type of mindset that we need to have with regards to actually correctly harnessing their productive power. And I understand that it might be difficult because a lot of folks who go into using those tools are individual contributors and they might not have a lot of experience managing employees and understanding the nuance between making a computer to do something that's reliably reproducible and then asking your employee to do something that may not be. And this is the biggest mind shift. Imagine you are in charge of a large development shop, a gigantic corporation's development wing, and you have 1,000 employees underneath you writing code. You have some sort of control over how HR might, get your labor, get your human resources when it comes to employees. However, you don't really have the final say with regards to every single one of them, so you can't really control their personality, their productivity, their code style, their past experiences, and everything. And you're presented with this problem that you're tasked, you're charged with the goal of shipping a cohesive piece of product with 1,000 different agents trying to write different parts of the application. How do you make sure that they do what you want them to do, and that they don't, number one, commit secrets and API keys into the database, follow a particular code style, and produce reliable documentation for future for other people's onboarding, as well as if there's turnover in the employees. And you have a lot of these are the problems that you, in particular as a tech lead of the entire company, of the entire corporation, would have to think about. And that's the mindset that we need to have when it comes to managing AI agents. Every time when you spawn an AI agent, as you're probably aware, its context is zero. It doesn't have the prior knowledge and information of any other previous agents that you have used. In other words, every time you spawn an AI agent, it's a new employee. And with that, there are three things that you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with them. Number one is concise and good instructions. Again, imagine again you're the tech lead of a giant corporation. When somebody onboards the team, you would tell this person, what they need to do, the guidelines they need to follow, the code styles they need to follow, the commit routines they need to, and rules they need to follow, and making sure not to commit secrets, and making sure not to like, for instance, making sure to use a particular subset of components that are within your company's approved list, as opposed to using random components from a different library, and stuff like that. All of that, you need to give the employee a set of concise and accurate instructions to follow. And this is the first important part about using agents. That's what you also need to do with agents. The way you do that, obviously, is different by agents, but for Codex, you would use the agents.markdown file to include the instructions you want the agents to follow, right? And then with Claude, I believe is claude.md, it's the same situation. And in those instruction files, you tell it what you want it to do, the rules that you want it to follow, and the conventions that you want it to follow, and stuff like that. That's the first part. In the same way that you need to tell your employees to follow the rules, you need to tell your coding agents to follow the rules. Second, there's an inchworm in front of me, and that's mildly concerning. Second, you could tell anybody to follow the rule, but the problem is that they might not. They might have a bad day. They might have a lapse in judgment on that day. They might have a gap in knowledge with regards to certain rules and stuff like that. Things can happen. So what do you do in a big corporation and a big company to manage 1,000 employees when it comes to actually enforcing the following of the rules? You enforce tests. You write tests, and then you enforce them in your CI/CD pipeline. That's the thing that you need to do with coding agents as well. So now keep in mind that in the instruction files like agents.md as well as claude.md, these are not deterministic. The agents can listen to it, can read it, and then try to follow the instructions, but they may not. They're just like humans. They may not. They might make mistakes. They might make a discretionary decision to determine that, hey, maybe this hard rule should be bypassed here because I need to accomplish some more important rules, right? So it acts just like an employee, a human being. And a lot of times this is undesirable. And in particular, if you've used Claude, dear Lord, it likes to make discretionary decisions outside of the hard rules that you specify in those rule documents. So what do? You write tests and you enforce them. In my particular repo, because it's a composed Kotlin multi-platform project, I have a suite of tests. I have consist tests, I have detect tests, I have just the standard repository tests, and I have build verification tests. In other words, whatever the agent produces needs to pass all those tests. And not only do I enforce that locally, I enforce that within CI/CD where the agent cannot touch. One of the things that Claude likes to do, that Codex has never done for me, is Claude likes to disable tests locally to pretend that it has passed the tests. And obviously that's highly undesirable. And keep again, like they're agents, right? They can do whatever they want. They can behave just like human beings. They can disable tests. But if you enforce those tests in an environment where it's deterministic that they don't have access to, for instance, in your CI/CD pipeline, they can't lie anymore because they don't have the power to override the tests within the development environment. And that's the second thing that you need to do. Write a lot of tests, very robust tests, cover as much as possible, and then enforce them in your CI/CD pipeline where they cannot touch. And if if certain tests report issues, then you get the agents to fix them. And of course, this also includes some very obvious ones, for instance, Git leaks and stuff like that. In other words, to detect secrets and stuff to not be committed. And, I'm not going to go into the details of writing those tests, but, there's a lot of good resources and information online about how to, what tests to write and how to write tests. So that's the second part. The third part is code reviews. And it might sound a little counterintuitive because, hey, I'm asking this agent to do it. Like, why do I need to get another agent to read the code reviews? And, I'll address that a little bit down the line. But again, imagine in a big corporation, code reviews are very standard. And the funny thing about this is that there's really not, like, code reviews are highly discretionary, right? If you've ever worked on a team, it's like you describe you set a rule for yourself in terms of what you look for in code reviews. And initially, you might think that it's not terribly helpful in terms of catching those issues, but you'd be surprised how effective code reviews can be. And that's also part of the reason why code reviews have been standard practice for a long time and continues to be the case, right? The code review cost is fairly minor. In other words, the reviewers don't have to, do the development work again. They literally scroll through the code review component of it on GitHub. And then the upside of it is actually unlimited because they can, the reviewers, even with not 100% reliability, can catch issues before they become an issue being built into the app. So in other words, code reviews are actually important when you're working with a team. And the same logic applies when you're working with AI coding agents. Keep in mind that AI outputs are not deterministic. Now, there's a little bit of a nuance here because technically they are. If you look into how LLM models work, they are actually deterministic. It's just that in the harness of the model, there's always a probability assigned to the final output. In other words, unless you have the same seed, you're not going to get the same type of results, despite the fact that the LLM models are actually technically deterministic. But that's neither here nor there. The upshot of it is that the AI tools that you and I have access to, they are not deterministic. They're randomly seeded. And not only that, the AI coding agent that actually does the implementation has a very different set of context than the AI coding agent that actually does the review. So there's a lot of value. And in the same way that, like the reviewer, a human reviewer would have a very different mindset, a different context in their brain when they are reviewing the code written by some other person. And you wouldn't ask in the same way that you wouldn't ask the same person who implemented the feature to review his own code, you would not ask the same AI coding agent to review the code that's written by the same agent. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to have a different model to review the code. All that I'm saying is, for the reviews to be valuable, you need to spin up another coding agent with fresh context. An agent who didn't implement the code in the first place to review the code another agent has implemented. And this, believe it or not, has caused a lot of mistakes in the implementation experiences that I've had with I'm only using Codex right now. And then the Codex agent can actually discover issues implemented by another Codex agent in the app. which is very surprising. Now, a lot of people like to use a different model completely. They like to use, if they're using Codex to do the implementation, they like to use, for instance, Claude to do the review. And personally, I'm not using that. And personally, I don't think it's technically necessary. That said, though, if you're using Claude to do your implementation, you better get Codex to do the code review for you, because Claude lies all the time. You need somebody, you need Codex, which in my experience has been far more reliable to keep Claude in check. That's all I'm saying. So to summarize, the 3 things that you would do as a tech lead in an organization, you would also use them, you would also do with your AI coding agents. These are, number 1, you need to give them concise and accurate instructions in agents.md or claude.md. Number 2, you need to do tests, a lot of tests. And you need to enforce them in an environment that the AI coding agents cannot touch. In other words, they cannot disable those tests. Now, they might still suppress the tests. Claude, again, does that all the fucking time, excuse my language, all the time. Write warnings, maybe not hard tests, because sometimes you do need to suppress those tests, but write warnings such that you can review them, right? If there are suppressions. And number 3, do code reviews. And do code reviews with new, fresh contexts if you're using the same model. And if you're using a different model, it's going to be fresh contexts by definition. So these are the 3 things that you need to do with AI coding agents. And if you do them, I think you'd be amazed in terms of discovering the additional productivity you can harness from those agents. In the same way that a lot of times, when you're writing a big piece of software, you can't really do it by yourself. You need to hire other people to do it for you. And if you can actually harness the additional productivity from the employees that you hire, you can build something that's far more complex and more robust. And the same rules apply and the same principles apply here when you're using AI coding agents. You cannot trust them, but there is a way to harness their power correctly. That's it. That's it for this week. I will see you next week.